Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, consciousness, and what it all means. So if you've been listening to my show for a while, you know there's some guests that I get overwhelmingly excited about, and Mark Epstein is one of those. Mark is an MD and psychiatrist in private practice in New York City and the author of a number of books about the interface of Buddhism and psychotherapy, including Thoughts Without a Thinker, Going to Pieces Without Falling Apart, Going on Being, Open to Desire, Psychotherapy Without the Self, and the Trauma of Everyday Life. His newest work, The Zen of Therapy, Uncovering a Hidden Kindness in Life, is out now. He received his undergraduate and medical degrees from Harvard and is currently clinical assistant professor in the post-doctoral program in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis at New York University. Hi, everybody. This month, I'm asking for your support on Patreon. So if you haven't had a chance yet to listen to my first episode of the year, go ahead and take a listen to that. And I explain a little bit more about why I am so passionate about Patreon. And one of the experiences that I had this past December with some of my patrons, where we had a 1-hour Zoom call, we were able to chat about everything and anything they wanted to talk to me about. And it was an amazing experience, I think, for them, but certainly for me as well. So please head on over to Patreon and help support the show. You can give any amount, $5, $10, $20. You can give less than that, but any little bit helps in supporting life, death, and the space between. Also, make sure you're following me on Instagram at Dr. Amy Robbins. And if you are interested in receiving my newsletter, which has bi-weekly soul wisdoms, please head on over to dramyrobbins.com and subscribe to my newsletter. Lastly, I'm still taking ghost stories for this year. So if you have a ghost story to share, please send that to team@dramyrobbins.com, and I will be excited to share it on my show. Another 2-part episode today with Dr. Mark Epstein, talking about his book, The Zen of Therapy. These conversations are just too good for me to shut down at 30, 35 minutes, which is normally the length that I like to keep my podcast. So today I will split up this podcast. Today is part 1, and then in just a few days, you will hear part 2. So please make sure to listen to both, particularly the end of part 2 has some really, really juicy goodies. So again, the Zen of Therapy. Welcome. Can I call you Mark? Welcome, Mark.
Call me Mark. You could definitely call me Mark.
Thank you so much for being here. As I said to you before we got started, this is such an honor for me to be able to talk to you. I've admired your work in the field for years, and I'm just excited to kind of to dig into some of the tenets you talk about in this beautiful book, which is really a way. I think at one point, I didn't write this down in my questions, but you said psychotherapists are voyeurs and I forget what the
Gossips.
other gossips. Yes. And I was like,
part
shoot,
gossip, part voyeur.
Part gossip, part voyeur. I'm like, shoot, I'm outed. Like that is, so much of what we do is we get to peek into people's lives and see more than peek. We get to journey in their lives and see what they're struggling with. And this book really does such a beautiful job of allowing us into the life of several of your patients over the course of a year's time to look at what they're struggling with. So I want to start with the question about, what do you feel like helps people heal the most in therapy?
What do I feel like helps people heal the most in therapy? Well, I think therapy is what helps people heal the most in therapy. When therapy is functioning as it can, as I like to use the word holding environment. When therapy functions as a holding environment, which means that anything that somebody wants to talk about, needs to talk about, doesn't want to talk about, but needs to talk about, anything can be spoken if the therapeutic alliance, if the therapeutic relationship is strong enough. I think that's what's healing about therapy. That's one way of putting it. I also think of therapy as like a spiritual friendship.
Mm.
So I think that that aspect of a very particular kind of friendship, whatever spiritual friendship might actually connote for a given individual, that that might also be a way of answering the question about what's healing.
And you tie these pieces together beautifully. And I'm curious, as someone who it took a long time for me to speak about my experiences, for you, what was it like kind of walking parallel paths in both psychotherapy and Buddhism? And then at what point did it feel like the two really worked beautifully together and should go hand in hand, frankly, as after I read the book?
Well, the thing about me that I think is rather unique is that although I'm a a Western trained psychiatrist, Harvard Medical School, et cetera, I got way interested in Buddhism and in meditation practice, in mindfulness, in vipassana or insight meditation before I knew very much about anything else. Certainly before I took pre-med courses, before I decided to go to medical school, I spent about 7 years as immersed as I could possibly be in the Buddhist world, sitting, 2 week silent mindfulness retreats, traveling to Asia with various teachers of mine who I was lucky enough to meet when I was 20, 21 years old. So I took all that with me when I entered the quote unquote straight world, when I went to medical school with the express desire to become a psychiatrist. And I think I was one of only maybe 2 people in my entire class who wanted to be a psychiatrist.
Yeah, it's not the
Everyone
most
else,
desirable
no,
coming
like
out of med school.
ophthalmology or dermatology if you want a good lifestyle, or cardiology or surgery or internal medicine or neurobiology. But I wanted to be a psychiatrist. And but I was already deeply influenced by Buddhism, deeply interested in it. So as I began to learn about what it was going to take to be a therapist, and I had very good teachers, everything they taught me, I was looking at through a Buddhist lens. So right from the beginning, I wanted the two worlds to work together because I needed both of them. I needed therapy and I needed meditation. And I felt in myself, oh yeah, these things, they're not at odds. They're like, they're both doing their best to help me. And I needed help. So so when I started actually being a therapist, I was always drawing on both traditions as best I could, because I think a good therapist, that's what they do. They draw on what has helped them, really. You're just bringing your own experience. Um, so, and then I started writing, which was a whole other endeavor, writing basically to try to translate, in my mind anyway, translate or interpret Buddhist psychological thought into Western psychodynamic language. But in order to do that effectively, I discovered, I wasn't a writer, I didn't think of myself as a writer, but I discovered that the more I used my own experience to try to illustrate what I was talking about, the more accessible the writing was. So in my early books, I tapped a lot of what it was like for me to be a patient in therapy, like my dreams of my teeth crushing on themselves, and, being in the psychotherapy office for the first time as a patient. And then I started writing about being on retreat, like what is the meditative experience actually doing for me? And I wrote about being on retreat and wishing that I could have a piece of toast to eat, and then finally they brought the toast out on the last day of the retreat, and I prepared it and sat down and ate the first bite very mindfully. And the next thing I knew, the toast disappeared because my mind had wandered. And I was like, who ate my toast? So those sort of stories, I think, made these two esoteric traditions much more accessible for readers, and also loosened something up inside of me where I was, actually using my own experience it wasn't just dense academic writing. So So then in this book, I decided, oh, I guess I could try to write about what it's really like to be a therapist, not just a patient, not just a meditator, but inside the subjective experience of being a therapist. And that's actually the through line in the book. The book is, a year's worth of face-to-face psychotherapy sessions before COVID hit. It happened to be. But the patients are chosen randomly. So it's sort of like a mosaic of patients, but the only real through line is my own subjectivity as a therapist and meditator, trying to bring these two worlds together, in the ordinary life of a therapist and of my patients. So
would you say meditation in some way, or maybe in all ways, is really Freud's version of free association?
Well, I would say Freud's version of evenly suspended
Yes.
attention or free association might be his version of meditation. I think Freud, using a lot of cocaine and analyzing his own dreams.
People don't know a lot of the things that went on with like that early group of.
If they read about it, they could know. They were totally out there. They were the bohemians, and there were people there were people in Freud's circle already interested in the spiritual traditions of the East. Students of Vivekananda and Ramakrishna, early German translators of Buddhism. So that was all around in Freud's day. But Freud was, looking at his own subjective experience, analyzing his own dreams, using cocaine to stimulate the introspective quality of his own analytical mind. And I think he, there's nothing in meditation that says it has to come from the East. It's a quality of attentional focus, meditation. So I think Freud came upon some version of it and then tried to put it to use in psychoanalysis, which I think can be seen as a kind of interpersonal meditation, a two-person meditation.
Just curiosity question.
Yeah.
You've gone through psychoanalysis?
Psychoanalysis? No.
Okay, you've never done
no.
it. Okay.
No, my therapist, I had 2 long therapies, both with Gestalt therapists.
Okay.
So Gestalt therapy, you sit face to face, you don't lie on the couch. But Gestalt therapy is like a 60s offshoot of psychoanalysis that came down through Wilhelm Reich and Otto Rank, and then Fritz Perls popularized it in the West.
I think my favorite part of the book was like, I had a lot of favorite parts. It's all underlined and annotated. My kids make fun of me for annotating books that I read. Was when you talked about being at lunch with your former therapist, who's now your friend.
Yeah.
And for me, I've been doing this work 20 years, but I think there's still so many parts of me that are kind of wedded to this like very structured way that I was trained, that, you don't wiggle outside the boundaries of the traditional psychotherapeutic model, which says, you aren't friends with your therapist. They have to be, not your therapist for a certain amount of time before you can interact with them. And there's all these sort of really what has felt, certainly to me in the last few years, and as I've worked on this podcast, constraining in a lot of ways, because it's felt like it hasn't allowed for me to bring myself into the room in some ways. And it sounds like you've been able to do that beautifully.
Well, I've been good at stretching some of the boundaries, but in saying that, I want to emphasize that those boundaries exist for very good reasons. Once you start wanting to be friends with your therapist, it changes the dynamic of the relationship, because then you start to worry what they're thinking about you, or maybe you're getting to know them too well so that they can't function, just as that just as that neutral kind of
Mm-hmm.
person who you can say anything to.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent a lot of time in therapy with my therapist. His name is Michael Vincent Miller. He was my first Gestalt therapist before we became friends.
Yeah.
Um, but the friendship is real, and we're both conscious of, oh, I was once his patient, but now we're
Mm-hmm.
friends, and there's still a little bit of that therapist-patient thing there between us. Um, After I saw Michael Vincent Miller in therapy, he sent me to his teacher and therapist, who was a well-known Gestalt therapist in New York named Isidore Fromm. And Isidore said to me right at the beginning, when you're with me in this room, I'm your therapist. If you run into me at a concert or at the store or down the street, I'm just Isidore. You know, so
Yep.
that really influenced me, because like you, I think I was always looking for a therapist who was authentically themselves.
Yes.
I wanted the real, I didn't want the blank screen. And many of the people, not all, but many of the people who come to see me also really appreciate that I'm not hiding who I am.
Mm-hmm.
My office has always been in the building where we live. When my kids were little, they'd be coming in and out of the building. My patients would see that. I was happy to talk about, aspects of my life that they might be interested in, that might be helpful to them. But I was always conscious about not doing that too much, getting in the way of what the patients were really there for. So it's a delicate balance, and as you know.
Yes. And I think your own therapeutic work helps.
Yes, tremendously.
So you know what's yours and what's theirs, and you can separate those two pieces.
Yes. But you can also let the real, there is a spiritual friendship, is what I call it. But if people don't have a spiritual sense, they could call it just a psychological friendship. That does develop when the therapy is working. So those are, it's a distinct kind of relationship. It's a miracle that it exists in our culture. This opportunity to, sit with another person with no agenda, to just get to know each other. When else does that really happen? So, it can be very special for the therapist and for the client.
Yeah, it is a precious gift.
Yeah. Precious
For us,
is the right word.
I think, as much as it is for our patients.
Oh, totally.
Sometimes even more so. I find like the growth that I've gotten from the work I've done with patients is, I feel grateful to them in so many ways.
Yeah.
So can you talk to me about anger as an obstacle to love?
I can talk to you about anger as a stepping stone to love, maybe,
Okay.
or as an essential ingredient of love. A kind of unsentimental love, where you're not only idealizing the other person, but you're learning how to be with another whole person who's outside of your subjective control. The thing about many kinds of love, when it's rooted in childhood experience, is that, a young child wants total control over his or her mother or father. They want undivided attention. They need to be mirrored or acknowledged. When the parents inevitably fail, because who can be perfect as a parent, a child naturally feels angry. So the anger that the child feels at the inevitable failures of the parents has to be dealt with somehow. And one of the big influences on my work is this British child psychoanalyst named Donald Winnicott. So his point is, parents all fail like this, but if they can be good enough, then the child learns that despite their anger, the parents survive.
This
that
concept was life-changing for me.
for me too.
As a parent, as a human, I reference it all the time.
Yeah, it was life-changing for me too, as a boy, as a man, as a therapist, as a meditator, because the linking of anger and love is very, very important. Many meditators, for instance, many spiritual people, many people in psychoanalysis are trying to suppress their anger because that they're ashamed of their anger. That doesn't work very well, at least not for a long, usually the anger rises up. And so Winnicott's point is that if the parent is able not to retaliate when the child gets angry with them, or abandon, so not to push too close in or not to pull too far back, but basically simply to survive the child's anger, then the child learns, oh, I can get angry at this person, because they're not perfect, they're not there, they're late to pick me up, they're my diaper needs changing, whatever
I'm
the issue.
hungry, they didn't feed me. I want my
Exactly.
screen, they won't give it to me.
Right, I can't sleep. Where are they? Can I come sleep in your bed? When the parent pushes back, or when the child gets angry, for the parent simply to survive gives the child the sense that their anger is not totally destructive. That love basically is stronger than anger. And the Winnicott's theory is that the young child, in dealing with this, starts to figure out that the parent is a separate person, not an extension of themselves, not an object that they can manipulate, but a person who has their own inner experience, that is separate actually from the child. And that, in Winnicott's view, is the origin of empathy, or sympathy, or concern. He calls it the capacity for concern. So the child starts to know the parent as a separate being in their own right, who they can have caring feelings for and angry feelings for. And so that tempers the anger, and relativizes it, contextualizes it, so that people start to understand that, oh, we're always going to be angry at the people we love, because who's perfect? But that's part of life, and that's something that we can deal with. And that comes up a lot on the meditation cushion too, for people who are into a meditative path.
Is the anger.
The anger, and then having to work through it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of old angers come up,
Mm-hmm.
or a lot of new angers, like, what am I doing here? And why won't this teacher talk to me? And I'm just a terrible person. Why can't I just have a peaceful, relaxing meditation? And instead, all these old resentments, all these old feelings of shame are surfacing, which is what they need to do.
Do most of your patients meditate?
I don't think so. Unless you really start to think about the therapy as a kind of meditation, then they're all meditating because they're there having to pay attention to me or to themselves. A fair proportion come to me because of my books, and they're interested in meditation, and they want to be led somewhere, that feels safe. And some people have come to me because they're already meditating, but it's not fixing them. They're anxious or depressed or whatever on top of the meditation, and they know I won't judge them for being interested in meditation or for failing to be as enlightened or awakened as it's been promised they will be.
Can you speak to that a little bit, and how perhaps our Western mindset kind of reduces our ability to really benefit from meditation, in terms of what we may have been told or believed, as this has become really mainstream? Meditation's become pretty mainstream, in terms of what it should do for us.
Yeah. Well, I started out, and I wrote about this a little bit in this book. I started out when I was still in college, and then all through medical school, working for a cardiologist at Harvard Medical School named Herbert Benson. Now, Herbert Benson did the first physiological measurements of transcendental meditators in the early 70s. He worked with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. He got TM people in. He measured their blood pressure, their oxygen consumption, their CO2 output. And he did the original research that showed that a regular 20 minutes twice a day meditation lowered your blood pressure by 5 points or so, and lowered your overall metabolic rate.
And for people who don't know, TM is a very prescriptive method of meditation. Twice a day, 20 minutes, mantra based. You're given the mantra.
Yeah, you pay for the mantra.
And I paid for the mantra.
Yeah, a lot of, and it's a nice introduction to meditation.
Absolutely.
Dr. Benson broke with the Maharishi after doing that research because he decided there was nothing special about the mantra. So why should people, be signing up for this particular lineage when any word would do? So he chose what he thought was a non-denominational neutral word, the word one, not thinking about all the spiritual implications of that word. And then he opened a clinic at one of the hospitals in Boston where he taught what he came to call the relaxation response to patients with essential hypertension that comes for no known cause. And he wrote a bestseller, The Relaxation Response, et cetera. So I became like his assistant for a little while. We wrote some papers together. I did some research on the placebo effect. But so I was up close and seeing how meditation was being absorbed by the press, by our culture as, oh, meditation equals relaxation, and if you do this twice a day, either TM or the relaxation response, you can expect, lower heart rate, lower blood pressure, you should be able, so it was being sold as, a vehicle to relaxation. Which it doesn't always do. Even 5 points on your blood pressure is not, it's no huge number, which is not to say that some people don't really benefit from it in terms of stress reduction. But after Dr. Benson, John Kabat-Zinn started to use mindfulness as a technique of stress reduction, and pulled mindfulness, the technique, out of the Buddhist tradition and began to talk about it as a secular kind of thing that also could be used for settling the body, helping with various health problems. So in a way, that was wonderful to introduce meditation to the culture that way. Our culture wants things that are going to work and work quickly and, make us more well, make us better. But in a way, it was being used to bolster the ego instead of to undermine the ego, which traditionally is what Buddhist psychology is all about, So coming up around all these people, I was always a little bit, or more than a little bit, suspicious of, oh, this is what you're saying meditation is for. And I was much more interested in it in a more holistic way, in a more psychological way, in a more spiritual way, which is why I've tried to integrate it, into my life and into my work and into therapy, not promising, you'll see in the book, I'm not promising that anyone is going to be healed totally, but that how can it creep inside? How can it insinuate into somebody's mind and emotional body, into their heart, and help them deal with their own implicit and intrinsic narcissism? I'm much more interested in talking about it that way.
And it is fascinating. Does this still happen to you after doing this? For how many years have you been a meditator, where your mind still takes a while to settle and it still jumps from, I always, when in my TM training, I'll never forget, because the beauty of that training was it gave you the opportunity, and I'm sure other trainings do this as well, to process what's happening in your mind. And I'll never forget, I was sitting there and all of a sudden it was like, shoot, what am I making for dinner? I need lettuce. I don't have salad. How am I going to get salad? Who's going to make the dressing? Like, it was like this nonstop, like, just flow of nonsense coming out of my mind. And then I was like, oh, why am I thinking about dinner? I should be, I should be focusing on my mantra, get back to the mantra. And then you find yourself, and then it's over. And you're like, God, I didn't get anything out of that because I was thinking about lettuce.
But see, it's not nonsense.
It feels like nonsense.
But what the mind does is think, and you had to get dinner ready. So of course your mind is thinking about what you're going to do for dinner. So the beauty of mindfulness as a technique of meditation, which is distinct from a one-pointed concentration meditation like TM, where you're repeating a mantra, and when you notice your mind wandering, you bring your mind back to the central thing. The beauty of mindfulness is that you learn to be aware of whatever is happening in the mind and body, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And you note the tendency to judge, to push away what feels irrelevant, to cling to what feels like, oh yeah, this is what meditation is for, but that's not what meditation is for. What meditation is actually for is to teach you how to be present with the entire range of your own experience. So that includes the chattering mind. It's quite possible to be both meditating and having those kinds of thoughts that you're talking about going on in the mind, but to not be totally lost in them. It is possible to be witness to your own thinking, and that's a remarkable experience.
And to not do what we want to do, which for me would be get up, write it down, start making lists. That would be my process.
Well, if you like making lists, you could have a little notebook next to you, and you could incorporate that into the meditation if you really needed to. But that tendency to categorize, that's the mind is capable of so much more than that. So that's again what we start to see when we meditate. That the chattering mind or the list making mind, is really just a superficial aspect of what the mind is really capable of. So if we don't, it's sort of like what the mother with the angry baby, if we don't retaliate, and if we don't abandon in the face of our own superficial minds, but we just leave it alone, and sort of be kind to it, then we can part the curtains of that sort of obsessive thinking thing, and start to experience, oh, I didn't know my mind could be present like this, could be still like this, could be open like this, could be filled with love like this, like what a revelation, so.